Bonjour à toutes et bonjour.
Good morning, everybody. So welcome in the studio of Radio France on the Seine River in the rencontre d'Aix-en-Provence, which do not take place in Aix-en-Provence, but in Paris en Seine at the Maison de la Radio, which is a partner of this rencontre. The social dialogue or the war of ideologies, the topic of this round table, which includes eminent specialists of the questions, which will not always agree, maybe even on the terms used or the notion of war of ideologies. With us, we have Marie KALDOR, who joined us from the London School of Economics, Reiner, HOFFMANN, the president of the German Trade Union Confederation, CAGÉ from Sciences Po in Paris, which has published Sauver les Médias, Laurence, PARISOT, president of Citigroup, and François, the president of the Association of the Maires of France and the mayor of the city of Troyes. And maybe minister with the government change? No, I don't think so. And with, of course, our partner from the Cercle des économistes, Pierre JACQUET. Good morning, Pierre. Good morning, everybody, and good morning to the technicians who are with us for this session, which will take place until 10 o'clock. Okay, Pierre, you wanted to do an introduction on a few topics so that we start the debate, maybe based on the title, the social dialogue or the war of ideologies. This has been our topic for the last week, so I'll go back to the title in a few minutes. But I'll start by saying that this topic of social dialogue is one of the explanations. So there is distrust of the population for the governments, blaming the government for not implementing the policies. Our new Prime Minister, Jean Castex, will be in the middle of those priorities. But the topic of this roundtable, and we're lucky to have with us the guests from Germany and from the United Kingdom. It'll be interesting to hear their opinion on the situation in their own country, how they perceive France also, and we can ask questions on how we perceive Germany and the United Kingdom. Maybe it does not correspond to reality the way we perceive these countries in both ways. So yeah, to start our debate, I would like to highlight three components to start with, which characterize, in my opinion, the present societal crisis, and which goes beyond our borders: the crisis of representation, a crisis of democracy, and a crisis of values. On the representation aspect, I will start by try to redefine the social dialogue as it's given by the International Labour Organization. Like all kinds of negotiations and consultations, or with the exchange of information between the representative of the governments, employers, and workers, based on different modalities on issues related to the social and political policies. So I think all this is essential, of course, fundamental, but I think this definition is highly institutional, which deals with the interaction between workers, the government, and employers. So for me, it's too narrow. It doesn't reflect reality. It goes and it involves all the citizens, whatever their role in society. And the citizens seem to no longer accept the traditional and they express these interests beyond these modes, notably on social networks, with an opportunist organization when their interests mix. So we have the loss of trust in the elites who are responsible for this representation. We talked about the incapacity in preserving the interests of those represented. We thought about the loss of trust also, which is a problem. And beyond the scientific approaches would lie on facts. Well, this is fueled by the role of social medias, of course. And this, in several governments, is at the basis of the return of populism. And like Pierre highlights it on populism, the century of populism. It seems to correspond to a claim of a lot of citizens and translates a real change in democratic aspirations and expectations. And the thesis of Pierre, I share this opinion, is that we need to analyze and better understand this dynamics and bring forth answers. So not only criticize populism, but see what's behind it. And it corresponds to a claim from a lot of citizens. Crisis of democracy. Democracy lies on deliberations, exchanges, and confronting ideas. And since we are in les rencontres économiques, would risk a parallel with the economy, the democracy is a space of contestations, which questions situations and beliefs, and it penalizes the abuse of power, and it's dynamic that enables to improve the well-being, maintaining a social consensus. And the reason I say this is when you study the efficiency of the market, we are very rapidly encouraged to see the quality of information, the broadcasting of this information, the quality of the access to information. Like for the economical market, information plays a major role in democracy. And the dissimulation, the falsification, the manipulation of information, fake news, have led, and they've led in the past to drifts, which are very dangerous. It seems to me that the recent evolutions have strengthened these problems or may worsen these problems. And it doesn't only concern the interpretation of facts and ideas, but more and more it affects the facts themselves with the freedom of expression on facts without any basis. And so recent economic evolutions, the existential anxiety around climate warming, environmental crisis, the challenges of technical evolutions, and we have to deal with these challenges, and they cannot boil down to an expression of dogma, simplistic dogmatic approaches, and they call for more nuance, and they involve some very delicate arbitrations. We have to decide on what we're ready to let go and who is legitimate to decide on deciding on these arbitrations. These arbitrations are often implicit, and it's with time that we see the impacts. And the past arbitrations are now judged as unacceptable, but they've not been explicitly or implicitly replaced by anything else. Inequalities, the damages to the climate, to the environment, are examples of this. We see that the change in arbitration is an issue. We see this in all the present debates. All measures are immediately criticized for the new problems they give rise to with a view to the existent. The existent is itself gives rise to problem. The problem is the problems of the ones is not the same for others. We don't share the same problems. The media, whose prerogative is to find or create the information, make it accessible also, they give more visibility to any opposition, whatever the validity of the arguments, and it contributes, not necessarily on purpose, but not the opposite either, to its visibility. The traditional modes of the organization of the democratic deliberation, given the crisis of representation, are saturated, inefficient. We'll have to innovate, and the recent initiatives of the mobilization of non-elected people with the Convention citoyenne sur le climat, they deserve to be our attention. Not only for the results, but also for the process. And what is the result? What problems? What issues have they identified? So, with of course the social dialogue, what role do we give to them? The idea of a citizen representation is arising. And it's very important for democracy. I will conclude by talking about the crisis of value, because the decision to accept all forms of representations lies on a basis of shared values, and it's this basis that is missing today. Today we have a crisis of values around the treatment of the human being. We see this. Oh, I'm sorry, we no longer have a signal. It's back. Protection of the environment, loss of biodiversity. So around the aspirations of our society, we see what makes the level of living, the way of living, the collective good, and the civic sense, you know, and to debate over values is also debating over ideologies, and this debate is on essential considerations, and the basis of common values should, in principle, be non-negotiable. Arbitrations are not acceptable because they are essential values, or we have to define the basis of values so that no arbitration is needed. And in fact, this debate can only take place with a clash of ideologies until the common basis or commonly accepted emerges. And it's possible and probable that this common basis never sees the light of day, and the values need to be contested or challenged, and it's they have to survive into all protests. And so we see that we need social dialogue and the clash of ideologies, and to the risk of having a contradictory debate, I personally, in the ideology of the Lumière, I believe in growth and consider that every day there's issues to face, and it's these challenges and the way we respond that make up our societies by creating new challenges. So the ultimate guide is the basis of values that guide our responses. We've seldom lived through situations at the world level and national level where shared values have such an importance. So thank you for stating these positions. So you're opposed to this, we can contest the notion of ideology. I think you've used often the word crisis. I said strange, yes, several times you use the word crisis, and we'll see with François BAROIN. I haven't set the rules yet. He will always take the floor at the end, you know, because he's in politics, so we'll see what his comments were. Who, CAGÉ or Laurence PARISOT, want to comment on Pierre Jacquet's presentation, introduction? Something you may not know is actually there's a question of the media and the way of communicating that is added to this notion of social dialogue, insofar as we can still talk about a dialogue. Laurence PARISOT, do you want to start? Yes, okay, I'll start. I find this introduction absolutely passionate, and I will catch the ball. I will take the ball, if I may, and react on the notion on the title of this session, because, in my opinion, this title reveals a lot of prejudice, the prejudice of a media elite or political elite or other, because with this title for this session, we are faced with an ambiguity and a dead end. Either we say that the social dialogue is the forum for the war of ideologies, and it's in fact a forum, a space where you can only have clashes, or we say that the social dialogue is there to avoid the ideological wars, and that's what a lot of people coming from social democracies, for example, or liberalism, stricto sensu. But anyway, whichever angle we adopt, we can say that since the social dialogue is so complex and sends us to fundamental positions like the fight for ideas and theories, but I think we have to leave it aside because we can't build anything out of it. So it sends us it's a little bit like Pavlov. It's a pejorative definition. Yes, it can set us to a pejorative definition of something that's quite abstract and doesn't enable to make things progress, or it can send us to a more Marxist conception, the ideology being in this case that of a dominating class. The dominating class can vary according to the periods or circumstances, but I think mainly that this way of setting the question or asking the question of the dialogue stops us from making this dialogue modern. As Rimbaud would have said, we have to think of the social dialogue today within the scope of the contemporary stakes and not making references to the 19th century or beginning of the 20th century. Based on my experience, and I'm very humble on that, but I'm trying to be realistic. My experience it tells me, even in France, we'll see what our English and German friends tell us, but even in France we can do a lot with the social dialogue, but I think it has to evolve. So maybe in a second phase of this debate, we'll talk about the conditions of its evolution. The dialogue has to evolve, and more so, this social dialogue has changed in nature with the confinement, with the remote working, with the Zoom, Teams, and Skype meetings. It worked very well. That worked very well. But maybe not everybody will agree. We have to be careful. The confinement enables for the employers to play around with the labor code and to change certain work methods, I don't think that in the functioning of our enterprises that it's possible to do things like in the background. You have to be upfront with this. But I'm basing my statement on what I read in the press. So we're in the heart of the subject. So based on the debate around this title, the social dialogue or the war of ideologies, les rencontres économiques d'Aix, it's an employer's title, and it's not a very good title. I don't think it's a very good title either. No, anyway, we have a very rich discussion, so let's go beyond this, the problem of the formulation of the title. I'd like to go back on the introduction, which was very interesting by Pierre Jacquet, very rich. You made a distinction between three dimensions of present crisis: the crisis of representation, democracy, and values. And I think that the crisis of representation and the crisis of democracy is only one crisis. I don't think there's a refusal of representation. And defining populism by a refusal to accept representations and the will to be the people. Populism is based on people. I don't think it's addressing the issue correctly. I think that today the demand for representation is a demand towards more descriptive representation, to go back on a terminology that dates back to Pichkin. So it means that you don't have to have representatives like you are, for example, insofar as the representatives represent your ideas. And today you underline the fact that we've gone too far. We've gone so far in the dichotomy between what our representatives are physically, i.e. men, white, mostly coming from the higher classes, and what is the reality of those represented, partly women, youth, visible minorities, people who also come from popular environments. So we've created this. Well, there's a problem is that this population has the feeling that it'll never become a representative, and so it's poorly represented. So I think we have to face these issues today, and by means of institutional changes, we made progress in terms of the parity, men-women parity. This was a vote in law. How do we ensure that we have representatives that come, that are men and women, and representatives that come from more popular classes? And this leads me to talk about another topic that Pierre Jacquet raised in his introduction, that of the media. Why do we have such a crisis of the media? Because we have a crisis of trust in the media. I think the deficit of representativity from the media also plays a role. So there are some progresses that are made, associations are created, non-profits, for example, Entre les lignes, for example, but today, there is what we are suffering of today, i.e. that the citizens are under the impression that the journalists, and I hate this word, is a caste that no longer addresses, it talks to them. And the profession of journalism is in crisis also, with journalists that have precarious jobs. So one thing that led to say during the COVID crisis, I don't think the employers wanted to pass their reforms, but there were some very tough announcements made. At RMC, for example, there's so it was a difficulty in mobilizing the forces. Sometimes some people used the COVID, like in Next Radio TV, to terminate people and have and implement social plans. Well, the social plans, including the agreements on performance, for example, do they? Is it a question of agility, or is it something that's done in the background? There are problems with the collective performance agreements. Dates back to 2017. A lot of economists underline the fact that in September these approaches would be adopted, and the COVID, let's say, made things worse. We saw that in the newspaper L'Équipe sports magazine. So why do I dislike the performance agreements? Because there's a democratic deficit inside enterprises. I think that if we had, as in Germany or like in northern countries, a true representativity of the salaried workers in their enterprises, with half the salaried workers and half the shareholders, then I don't think we should have these agreements. And there's a question of the representativity of trade unions also. They are no longer legitimate because of the very low participation in the elections in France of the trade union representatives. So we need more representativity, more representation. So in a few minutes, we will ask our German friends to say what he thinks. Laurence PARISOT, I think, is boiling here in her corner. So,
sur lesquels je peux être tout à fait en phase.
First, there are many points I agree on. We must ask ourselves how to represent people and how to improve this representativity. I was one to decide upon, and in agreement with the union leaders, I was in favor of representativity of union. It was a reform in 2008, and I think we have to move forwards in this direction. People tend to criticize unions, but I wish to support them. Because the saying is that they only represent 8% of the French people, and it's been the same figure for the last 20 years, which does not seem very reliable. Well, in Germany, of course, the union's representativity is much stronger, but the functioning is completely different in terms of institutions. In France, you have elections. In the company, you have a staff representative, and at least 50% of employees vote for a representative. So we have to use the correct criteria to assess representativity. Now, the question is how to make sure that thanks to those representatives, we can think in a better way of the content of the speeches. And that's probably the main difference with Germany. You were talking about competitive agreements, and the German union representatives at Lufthansa just signed an agreement to salvage the company, and they agreed to dismissal and wages reductions. So if there's a difference between France and Germany today, it is concerning the understanding of the economic issues and economic challenges. So it's about co-management. No, it's not only about co-management. Would it change something to have more employees within a board? It's possible. I don't know about that. But in many companies, there are 2 representatives now when the companies are over 5,000 employees. But some of the union representatives did not agree because they did not want to be 2 in the same room. But then the economic and environmental issue and the content of the discussion is essential to modernize the social dialogue. So I think we should turn to our German guest who just joined us, Reiner HOFFMANN, who's the president of the German Trade Union Confederation. Hello, Mr. HOFFMANN, and thank you for joining us from your place. And the title of the debate that has been contested is Social Dialogue or Ideological Warfare. If I look at La Croix, there's a description saying that the situation of the social dialogue in the first weeks were a moment of mutual help, and he doesn't use the word war at all. So what is your feeling in connection with social dialogue? Hello, everyone. I'm in Berlin, and I hope you can listen to me clearly and that the translation is fluent. So everything I heard was very interesting. I also asked myself about the question, social dialogue or ideological warfare. Is that a relevant title? Because first, I think that social dialogue is taking forms that are very different from one country to another within the European Union, and even in Germany, depending upon the economic and industrial sectors. So the dialogue is different. You have to see what your partners are for social dialogue and are they ready to discuss. In Germany, we talk about social partnership, so it seems very peaceful. But a social partnership can also generate conflicts. It depends upon the organizations, the CEOs, and the unions. Are they willing to negotiate so as to find a common compromise and common results? But their interests, those of the employees and the employers, are different. Instead of talking about ideologies, I think we should focus on goals and ask ourselves what are the interest conflicts so that we could analyze and understand them and then find a common dialogue so as to achieve valuable results for both sides. Let's take the example of the Federal Republic of Germany. We are facing three realities within the working world. We have different industrial sectors, such as creating machines, chemistry, the automotive sector. And in those sectors, social dialogue is quite reliable. It doesn't mean there are no conflicts, but the heads are willing to negotiate with the unions. Then there's the tertiary sector, that of public services, and the dialogue, social dialogue is strong. But when it comes to the tertiary sector and the private branch, employers are not willing to organize themselves so as to take part in the social dialogues. And then there are other sectors that refuse the dialogue completely. In the French press in the last few days, they reported the catastrophic working condition concerning meat processing, for instance. And the people from Bulgaria, Hungary are working in very difficult conditions and have housing conditions that are absolutely disastrous, which created a wave of COVID-19. And that was because there was no social dialogue, and it was an open conflict, which is irresponsible concerning employers' organizations. And if I may point out something, in Germany, we also have some sort of a deficit in terms of dialogue. There are two forms of participation to decision-making in companies. Something which is similar to France, that is using company committees. And 26,000 companies have their own committee, which means 180,000 employees being organized within unions. Then there is participation to decision-making, and we have more than 2,000 employees. And their stakeholders when they meet with the shareholders, for instance. In the last few years, we had very interesting and productive experiences which allowed us to change the structure and to realize that the interests were different. My French colleague told me that in France, the idea is that you collaborate with the capital, with capitalism, that it's a heavy responsibility. I can see that the French unions have changed also in the last few years. We talked about that within the European Confederation of Syndicates, of Unions. And to be able to talk at a European level is really interesting and an opportunity for us, because it allows us to strengthen the power of the Union. We do not wish to export our German model to other cultures, but some aspects of our dialogue might be generalized. But that would be another topic to address. And maybe I can stop here for my contribution. Thank you for your attention. There's a question I wish to ask, and I hope you can hear me, and then we'll hand the floor to Marie KALDOR, who's online with us. A very simple question, maybe a candid one. The French are often jealous, critical, or critical of the German, because we feel you're doing everything better. What is the better thing you do compared to us? Because when there's a social conflict or a strike, people say, well, you see, in Germany it's completely different because social dialogue is so much better. So I'd like for an honest answer from you, Mr. Hoffmann. You know, we also like to look at what you're doing across the borders. In fact, employers must agree to improve social dialogue before making decisions. If it's the other way around, even in Germany, it can be very conflictual. So it's a question of being ready or not to have a social dialogue. It's about employers, governments, and sometimes I feel that my French colleagues with the CGT, CFDT, or FO have probably more troubles than we have to have an actual social dialogue. Okay, we understood the answer. Any comment, Laurence Parisot? Yes. Aren't you jealous of the social dialogue in Germany? No, I'm not jealous. I think we could be better in terms of social dialogue. And I was able to show that in the past. A practical answer that you might not be aware of. In Germany, you only have precise periods to be on strike, that is, those of collective agreements. So the outlook you might have on strikes in France compared to strikes in Germany comes from the fact that the rules are stricter in Germany. Julia CAGÉ. I think this is not the right way to talk about things, and the media focus throughout the COVID crisis saying that Germans are much more respectful. I don't really believe in cultural differences. When I studied democratic financing, what we see are institutional differences. So if you're jealous of the social dialogue in Germany, well, let's have the same institution and the same frameworks in France, and then we'll be as good as the Germans. I absolutely agree. François BAROIN, what is your outlook on political action, because you're the president of French Maires, and territories are very varied over the country. So if we look at the headlines in the press, it means that the main concern that the crisis will be even harsher, especially in September. So will it be possible to settle the problem? And what about social dialogue? Well, if I answer no to can you do anything, I can pack my bag and do something else. If someone is committed to public life, then he wants to do better. But could you feel helpless? Well, you shouldn't feel helpless. The idea is to make sure the social dialogue is efficient, because in the last few years, things have changed considerably. And what Pierre JACQUET defined was very interesting and relevant, even though representativity and democracy are part of the same ideas, but the values are quite different. Are values a rule or vice versa? Those are very tricky questions. Now, concerning consequences of the COVID, there were many studies. What we expect for October and December, 30% of the bar restaurant might close, 1 million of people unemployed. Half of the French population lives in cities of less than 10,000 inhabitants. And so the daily problems are not the same. And that's what we saw after the municipal elections. There's some sort of a withdrawal of the citizens. Is it because people mistrust the political power? In fact, I'm wondering, I don't know, because the Maire is the last recourse to political framework and direction. But you do not have a city now as you did 20 or 15 years ago. And I really changed the way I'm a mayor. We have neighboring committees because we can talk to them, and they can support us when we make decisions. Let's have a national example. That's what we implemented with the Citizen Convention. Macron thought he could have some people that would be representatives. And the suppression of the position at a local or national level was virtuous because
so the medias that place under stress the people they talk to. So this brings us to, because we're talking about the social dialogue, to redefine what is a dialogue and what is the social dimension. But everything boils down to social issues. If you ask a question on after how we mayors are preparing ourselves, we have to be aware that this crisis is first of all psychological. We don't insist on the psychological side of this crisis. People worry. People are afraid. They stayed at home. They accepted something that affected their freedom. And the Germans also, with their German discipline, they respected what was proposed. But the French also. And they did that with a lot of worries and fear. And coming out of the lockdown is something very important. How we should accompany me. You can't imagine the number of demands we get for psychiatric help, psychological help from people and families with the coming out of the lockdown. We'll see what happens after the summer break. We'll see the tensions that will appear with the people who will lose their jobs. So we have to have an agenda. We have to have work methods taking into account the psychological aspect. A lot of sharing. That's where the social networks can be very useful. And we have to set objectives, preserving employment, guaranteeing the association fabric. Laurence, PARISOT, and all the guests around this table know this very well. If the population at more than 50% is in smaller urban areas, urban communities, the economic fabric is there also. And what will be hit is that what was the driving force of the yellow jackets. And if we have yellow jackets times 10, it's not against Macron. The fracture is there, the divide is there. So we like to turn to London and ask our guest the question. Maybe Mary KALDOR wants to react on what was said, but there's one question from the Rencontre d'Aix, a question from Artigiano, social dialogue or war of the ideologies. Social dialogue, is it strengthened or not after the COVID-19 crisis? Marie KALDOR, can you comment on this?
First of all, I'd like to say I'm very jealous of the German social dialogue, and I'm also very jealous of the role of Maires in France, which is much more responsive and local than anything we have in the UK. I interpret the question, social dialogue versus war of ideology, as if you like, the competition, the struggle that's going on between those who believe in a deliberative democracy, deliberative democratic process, and the rise of populism, which we see in all our countries. For us in Britain, the Brexit debate was very hard, and part of its hardness was that it was impossible to debate with Brexiteers. Those of us who were against Brexit wanted to discuss the pros and the cons, and the answers we got is that you don't care about our feelings, you think we're stupid, we just want our country back. And of course, the underlying argument was we don't want immigrants, but it was impossible to have a kind of rational debate because people were not, those people who supported Brexit were really unwilling to engage in a discussion about what for them were feelings and emotions. So I think that's what this question is about. And I do think that COVID-19 might be a moment when social dialogue comes back. I think this rise of populism is very much what Gramsci called morbid symptoms. he made the point that morbid symptoms arise when the old is dying and the new cannot be born. And I'm wondering if COVID-19 is a moment when the new might be born. What do I mean by that? Well, I think we're at a period in history, the end of the American model of development based on mass production, industry, intensive use of fossil fuels, all of those kinds of things. And we can't change because our political institutions are stuck in that period of history. And social dialogue is blocked because however much we discuss the kind of changes we want, it doesn't seem to influence policies either at national or European levels, maybe a little bit more paradoxically at European levels. Why? Well, I think it's quite useful to think that, to make a distinction between procedural and substantive democracy. We all have procedural democracy. We have elections, we vote, but substantive democracy means being able to influence the decisions that affect our lives. And we don't seem to be able to do that. Why not? Well, I think it's partly because of globalization, greater interconnectedness. Many of the decisions that affect our lives are simply not taken at the national level. They may be taken at local levels, or that much more importantly, they'll be taken in the headquarters of multinational companies. They'll be taken on the laptops of financial speculators. They'll be taken in Brussels, in New York and Washington, but not in the place we vote for. But I think that's only part of the story. The other part of the story is the state is stuck in old-fashioned ways of doing things. It's stuck in the military-industrial complex. And in the case of the UK, it's been totally hollowed out and privatized as a result of 4 decades of austerity. It's become a rentier state in which the only reason why people like Boris Johnson want to capture power is so that their supporters can gain government contracts. It's really shocking the way all the contracts relating to COVID-19 have gone to the Brexiteer companies and not to, for instance, public health or local government. So I think it's in this situation where there's enormous frustration, enormous sense of disempowerment, that populism really rears its ugly heads, as we've seen in my own country. So what are the prospects for social dialogue to come back? Well, I do think that COVID-19 could be a transformative moment. In the past, these transformative moments have been related to war. But actually, COVID is a little bit like that in 2 senses. One is it's a huge rupture in our everyday lives. And the other is it's really an existential problem. It's shocking when you think about it that in my own country, more people have died than died in the Blitz in the Second World War. Overall, worldwide, the numbers are approaching the numbers that died in the First World War. And because it's an existential crisis, it causes us to rethink everything. I think also, there is luckily a rethinking of austerity policies. And I think there is luckily a huge rethinking at the level of the European Union that could lead to very big changes. I think we're suddenly becoming much more aware of the climate because we've reduced travel, we've cut material consumption, we've reduced fuel emissions, and suddenly people are discovering how beautiful the areas around them are. And I think the very first speaker talked about the social media, but what we've also seen as a huge increase in meetings like today's digital online meetings, which actually favors the possibility of deliberation and social dialogue on a much greater scale. I think above all, the ways in which we deal with COVID will sort of shift the nature of political institutions. I mean, I think there is a degree of decentralization. We have heard from the mayors in France about what they are doing. In my own country, this is not happening, but at the same time, there's a huge outburst of community organizing. We're also seeing in Britain a devolution of responsibility to Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland, and they're doing much, much better than England. And at the same time, I'm hoping that we will see the kind of changes in the European Union needed to survive. And in those contexts, I think the possibility of a meaningful social dialogue becomes much better. Our German friend talked about social partnership. My feeling is that historically what's happened is that we have waves of social movements where people agitate for for change, whether it's in our current period, climate change or Black Lives. And at certain moments, those movements fail or succeed. And when they fail, then these are moments of morbid symptoms and of populism. But when they succeed, they become institutionalized and respectable, and institutions accept part of their agenda. And that's when social dialogue is possible. So the social partners in Germany, the trades unions, are the product of labor movements, which got transformed at a certain moment into trades unions and parties and partners and social partners. And let us hope the same thing might happen as a consequence of this COVID-19 moment.
Merci pour la COVID-19.
Thank you.
Et je demanderai aux uns et aux autres.
Okay, thank you. And if you could please have shorter interventions, it would be nice. First, a question for all of you from Brian Favlon on our website, and which is connected to our question of the digital edge. How to ensure faithful representativity of the people in its diversity when we are the era of the people? Isn't the ideological warfare testimony of the varied opinion? Oh, Marc CAGÉ? Well, in fact, it is my work upon democracy that is interrogated here. I think we could change institutional rules. Let me come back to what I said earlier, that is what I called social parity and mixed assembly. If we want to ensure better representativity today, it won't be easy, and we need to change the rules. If we want parity in politics, well, we had rules. And we didn't go as far as we should have, because some people rather have less public help than to respect the parity rules between men and women. Do you? Is it the case, Mr. Barouin? Yes, but I'm not responsible for this. I'm just asking you as an expert, you know. That's one of the factors. A second factor, because Marie KALDOR underlined the need for financial support. Well, in the UK, and contrary to France, which is a good point for France, and in the UK, just like in Germany, companies give money to political parties, and this is authorized. Now, if you look at the deficit of representativity of the Labour Party, there's a clear change because the finance came from private company rather than from unions. So, of course, people give money and they generally don't go to the Labour Party. So we should not think this is impossible. We should not select people at random, but change the institutional rules and to have representatives that look much more like the people in the street. Laurence PARISOT? Yes, in fact, today we're all facing the threat of populism or populisms under various forms. Let me quote Lacroix. In the past, democracy was nothing like fascism. So social dialogue under its different forms are very interesting tools to avoid that populism spread. And COVID has shaken us and raised many questions. The former Treasury under Bill Clinton wrote in an American paper, we have to make sure that unions are much more vigorous, because that would be one way to fight populism. So in the question of democracy, there's the question of debate or deliberations. And let me tell you that I invented a concept that was used a lot when I discussed with unions. And the concept was that of social deliberation. And to me, it was the preamble to any efficient negotiation. So facing populism, the middle intermediary bodies are vitals, just like the local representatives are vital. So what we need, and where I agree with Julia CAGÉ, is that there are rules to change or to invent so that we can give momentum to the unions and to have them work on modern content. Some, and it's not a question of left or right wing, but some decision makers or politicians threaten the unions. I think that would be a mistake. I'm part of those who consider it is an emergency to give power to the unions. But what do you mean by power? Well, if you want to understand a country, you need to understand its history and its building. Now, if we look at the social movements right from the 13th century up to now, and in 1946, the right to strike, which was constitutional in our law, it was non-negotiable. Now, this is something that has been acquired and which creates a form of social dialogue that allows people to freedom. Of course, here now we have populism rising, and some political representatives might look more moderate from the outside, but maybe not from the inside. And if the mayors are so active, if we have so many unions, if they are more vigorous, it's because they have the feeling and they're facing the reality that they are not respecting any longer. Now, when we elect the President of the Republic, it feels that one man is going to be in charge of all the French burden, but it's not the case. Now, selecting citizens at random using referendums that we could do on the social networks, means that the strongest will rule, and then democracy will collapse. So if we want a social or citizen dialogue, we need to have more players that can express themselves. Because democracy has been built through many centuries, and it was about working together in society. And in 1789, in our country, people rose and asked for help and for hope, and this hope was called freedom. Now, this collapse of democracy is something that comes back very often in the public debate, and you seem to mention it quite often. So, is it something you fear? Is it for tomorrow, the day after? Let me give you a recent historical example. The Citizen Convention is quite interesting because when someone says it is the emergency to protect the planet is not compatible with our democratic system, well, this is totalitarianism. It's not democracy any longer. This is collective responsibility. We have to ensure the future of the coming generation. So we cannot negate all kinds of freedom. If you have a garden and you cut your tree, well, you are committing a genocide under the environment. This is to fuel the debate, but we have to be balanced and strong. Julia CAGÉ reacted when you talked about cutting a tree. Well, I'm not owning anything and I don't have trees, but democracy is a very modern creation. My grandmothers couldn't vote. It only happened in France in 1944. So the evolution is very slow, and we have to accept the fact that current institutions are being criticized, but we can improve them. If I want to understand the current crisis, I'd like to come back to the difference between substantive and procedural democracy. In the last years, and that's probably why the crisis is so difficult, the idea of an ideological warfare and a dichotomy between progressism and populism. But because we are aware we cannot wish for populism because it seems derogatory, then progressism is the only thing left. And progressism is procedural democracy. That is a number of things that are imposed upon us and that we cannot discuss, such as globalization, the weight of finance. And that's why we have this anger of the people and helplessness of the people, as in the Yellow Jacket movement. So it would be nice not to oppose good from evil and not to go from black to white, but have some sort of an array of gray colors. So let me come back to Pierre Jacquet's introduction. There might be different solutions. There will be losers and winners, but we have to wonder about those. And we have to think about elections and deliberation. Maybe we can give more weight to some losers, less to some winners, and so forth.
Laurence PARISOT, I think that a lot of stakes are related to the content of what we deliberate on. You just said that we need to be able to talk about globalization. I fully agree. We will probably not agree in the following phase, but to talk about it, you're absolutely right. You have to talk about the weight of finance. Yes, there again, it's absolutely a must, and so on and so forth. But the question is the content. And that's why I mentioned on several occasions, you know, when I say that we have to make the social dialogue more modern, I'm convinced that trade unions, as employer unions, they have to do that. They have to put themselves in question. And I suggest, for example, that from now on in the debates and the negotiations, everything that can be related to the environment or fight against climate change or the protection of biodiversity, preservation of biodiversity is part of the topics. We don't integrate this ecological environmental aspect in the social dialogue, not as it's defined today. It should be, of course it should, because it's a compromise that we'll have to find to reach between economic aspects and environmental aspects. When we discuss or talk about the future of the aeronautic sector, you quickly understand that you're faced with these three dimensions, the three pillars: economical aspect, social, and environmental aspect. So you don't no longer go to the Seychelles Islands on vacation. If you no longer go on vacation abroad long distances, or you can have carbon points, carbon tax, you know. Sorry, everybody's talking. One at a time, one at a time. So, yes, so more seriously, these parameters have to be taken into account. If we continue to build so many aircraft, we'll have to make a compromise with the environment. If we build less aircrafts, then it's a social issue. I think we have to strike a balance, and it would be better to define this in a renovated social dialogue. And as I like what Monsieur BAROIN, François BAROIN said on the committees in urban areas, their contribution to the municipal decisions. So there will be hundreds of questions to ask, and there's a question here that the politics now start with, you know, when we have discussion, we need this, we need that, involving that the others have to give me what I want. And so, of course, it makes it very complicated. People ask, demand. But there's never, you know, a give and take. You confirmed that, François BAROIN. So it's 9:58. You have a minute and 30 seconds, and I need 10 seconds to thank everybody. So Pierre, JACQUET, if you can conclude or give us some so quick comments. I think this title was finally excellent. It was flexible, and we don't know who came up with this title. No, it's not. I had nothing to do with the choice of the title, but finally it gave rise to a very interesting, rich debate. It was interpreted in different ways, understood in different ways, and we covered a lot of ground. So congratulations to the Cercle des économistes for choosing this title. Secondly, I must say I agree with the link that was made between the representation crisis and democracy crisis. I would have added the crisis of information, because we really have a big problem in our understanding of information, and the understanding what a fact is, the interpretation of a fact. And I think this, of course, is a matter of education, because we don't spend enough time in the education system. I like the distinction between procedural and substantive democracy. And I think that in the we have to find the means to really place our efforts on the substantive democracy and involve the citizens in debates on topics and dynamics that belong to them. Is the case of globalization, the compromises we have to have with the environment. It's a compromise. We talk about interactions between humans and nature, and it doesn't work by putting one on top of the other in a non-interactive way. And I would conclude on two aspects. First, the values. We should always bear in mind the importance of values, but they seem to be essential because they guide the discussions and the interpretations. And frankly speaking, there are debates on values today. And lastly, on society, François BAROIN was saying that people are afraid. I think that, one, we have to deal with this fear, and we have to work on the emergence of fear. And the emergence of fear is based on the fact that we're in societies that do not accept uncertainties. They don't understand the risk. And I think in our education system, we have to introduce the fact that there's no ultimate protection. We have to have an institutional body that finds the way to compensate for the risks and ensure protection. So that's a stake, a challenge, accepting uncertainties, understanding the risk. And this is all stems from the COVID. KALDOR is right to be optimistic. We have to build this optimistic together, and we'll need this in the months to come and after the summer. So thank you, Mary KALDOR in London, from the London School of Economics, Reiner HOFFMANN, the president of the German Confederation of Trade Unions, Julien CAGÉ from Sciences Po Paris, who's publishing at Fayard, Free and Equal Rights, and François BAROIN, the president of the Association of French Maires, and Pierre, JACQUET, thank you. And we can, of course, go back to these debates on the website of the Rencontre Économiques, rencontreéconomique.fr, and on the France Info website, franceinfo.fr. I'd like to thank all the technicians for... So we're 1 minute 40 late, but that's my signature. I'm always late. Thank you very much.